This is Rabbi Dov Fischer of Young Israel of Orange County, and welcome back after our several weeks hiatus for the Chagim, and we're back to Shmuel Bet, 2 Samuel, chapter 9, Perek Tet. We're going to review a little bit and go into the commentaries from the start of the chapter, and we're learning about the life of David HaMelech, King David at this point, and so what could be more appropriate than to begin with just a little bit of that Shlomo Carlebach melody that really became that classic memory of
David Melech, Melech Yisrael, David Melech Yisrael, David Melech, Melech Yisrael, Melech Yisrael, Mevekaya, Mevesema, Sema Tov, Mother, Mother, Mother Tov, Vayelanu Kol Yisrael, hey, la 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 David Melech, Melech Yisrael, David Melech, Melech Yisrael, David Melech, Melech Yisrael, Melech Yisrael, Kalekaya, Sema, Sema, Tov, Mother, 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 Tov, Ayelanu Kol Yisrael, Amen. La 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 la.
Okay, we go into the text, and here's where we left off. David Melech Yisrael, David, the king of Israel, had now found himself at a time of peace. Nation is at peace, and he has prepared everything for his son, who is not yet born. He already has at least 6 sons, but none of them, a different son, not yet born. He has been told in prophecy by the prophet Natan that future son, whom we know is going to be Shlomo, King Solomon, that he's going to be, that boy will grow up to be king of Israel and build the Beit HaMikdash, the long promised and awaited house of the temple of God. That's coming. And he has prepared everything for that son, who is not even yet born, to be able to just put the pieces together, like just Beit HaMikdash in a box. He's already gathered all the wood and gold, silver, brass, copper. He's already lined up all the servants, and everybody's going to be ready. He's got King Hiram of Lebanon, Tyre, who in those days Phoenicia, and the city of Tyre, and King Hiram is going to bring all the wood, the cedars of Lebanon, literally. And now David then turned to all the surrounding nations and decided he wants to leave his son with a country in peace. So he went to all the different nations that always attack us, and he always played defense all his life. As we see in our own lives, the way Israel for the last 15 years had been playing it in Gaza, constantly not going into Gaza and just defending. That's what Israel's been doing for years. And then finally, Israel, after October 7, the determination was made, we're never going to get anywhere if we just keep playing defense. We have to go inside, and we have to put an end to this for once and for all. So David's strategy was the exact same thousands of years earlier. He basically decided, I do not want to give my son a kingdom where all these hostile nations are waiting to attack. So he went into each of those nations and pretty much destroyed their opposition. He did not utterly wipe out the nations. He did the equivalent of what Israel now is doing to Gaza and has been doing to Gaza. He made it so that those nations will not attack Israel again for at least one generation, at least one lifetime, if not more. It would be very surprising once that war in Gaza ends, if they try to start a war and start kidnapping people, and even if they can do it, even if they could figure out a way to do it, it would be very surprising if they tried that again in the next few years after what's happened. So that's what David did, and that's what we learned before we took our break for Sukkot. And now we had just begun chapter 9, where David now looks at the everything around him, at the horizon, the political horizon, and the life horizon, and kind of feels there's nothing else to take care of. We're at peace. I'm king. I have my cabinet. I've cleared out the enemy. I prepare for the Beit HaMikdash. Let's just finish one or two loose ends, tie up one or two knots, and we're good to go. And we can end our chapter at chapter 9 or 10. Still have to have that son that's going to build the Beit HaMikdash. That's about it. We can finish the chapter with the book in another chapter or two. At least that's what it looks like going into chapter 9. And so in chapter 9, as he's trying to tie up the remaining loose ends, let's see, what else do I have to do? Oh my gosh. I had made a promise to Jonathan, my beloved friend Jonathan, with whom I made an eternal covenant, that we will be two brothers forever. And if either of us goes first, the other will take care of the deceased's offspring and family. I'll always be there for him. And so, oh my gosh, I haven't attended to that. Okay, that's a loose end. We got to get it taken care of. We did the Pesukim, we did not do the commentary before the break, so that we could freshly kind of connect before the break to the resumption. Is there anybody else left in the house of Saul? Notice, by the way, he does not say, is there anyone else left in the house of Jonathan? He goes beyond that. Although Shaul, the king, tried to kill him several times, indeed had him on the run for a good part of his life, David knew he was the successor to King Saul. He knew King Saul was not fully in touch with his faculties, and David wanted to do right. And what a way to make peace and to unite a country. You know, we live in a time where the country is so divided, and you see what happens where two contending candidates for the presidency every single day find something new over which to divide the country, new allegations and new name callings, and just dividing the people. And it goes on like that in Israel. Even at war, every Saturday night, all the anti-Netanyahu people gather in the city of Tel Aviv at Rehov Kaplan to demonstrate against Netanyahu and hopefully get world media coverage in the New York Times, the Washington Post, against Netanyahu, so that they can report on Sunday and Monday throughout the world that Netanyahu does not have the support of his own people. And how do you know they're aiming for us in America and for people in England? Because half their signs are in English. They're placards, all silk screened and prepared way in advance, not just like it's funded. They're heavily funded against Netanyahu. They demonstrate and they call him horrible names. And he's not perfect, just as we do not have a perfect leader in the United States. He's not perfect, and he's got things to answer for. But the hatred and the division, and that's why we sing about King David, Melech Yisrael. Now, those were times. That was a leader. That was a leader for all time. Why do we sing of this king if he has flaws also? He united the country. He did everything he could throughout his life to let bygones be bygones and to unite the country. So he now raises out not only as a matter of a private covenant with Jonathan, but he wants to bring in the entire house of Saul. Is there anybody left from the house of Saul whom I can say mochesed, for whom I can do kindness? I'm in a position now to do it. But avur Yonatan, and especially because of my special pledge to Jonathan, but I'm not limiting my pledge. I'm willing to extend it to the entire house of Saul. Beit Shaul Eved ushmot Siva. There was a guy named Siva, and Siva had been a servant of the house of Saul. Now, what does a servant do in a private home nowadays? You don't have servants per se, but like a housekeeper or a butler. So they maintain the house. A man who would be the chief servant to the king was in charge of the king's, not only his palace, but his estates, his fields. All the fields had to be maintained, fruit and vegetables to be grown and cared for, and trees and forests and all kinds of fancy caring of the lawns and to take care of everything. And Siva was the main guy in charge of all the servants of King Saul. Vayikru'ulo el David. And with David having asked, is anyone left at the house of Saul? People called Siva. We know him. He was the maitre domo of the Saul house. Let's bring him in. He should know who's left. Vayomer HaMelech elav ha'atat Siva. And as he walked in and presented himself to the king, David asked him, are you Siva? And the man responded, I am your servant, Avdecha. Now, what's going on in these first two verses is that I've already explained as far as verse 1. We'll look at the commentaries more deeply, but David wants to do right by the house of Saul. And in number 2, when he asks, are you Siva? There's a fascinating commentary. We'll look at it more carefully. The commentator says that very often, now this Eved was not Jewish, and very often when someone converts to Judaism, they change their name. Let's say their name before was Jesus, so change the name to Yehoshua, or maybe completely to Dov. I don't know. Often, like at the Rabbinical Council of California, Rabbi Union, the director of the Rabbinical Council, Beit Din, the court that does conversions, suggests to prospective converts when they've basically gotten to the point that they're converted. They've gone to mikvah, the men have had their bris. He often, when he asks them what name you've chosen, he personally, his thing is, he prefers, not as a requirement, but he suggests not to just take their secular name from their non-Jewish life and to Hebraize it. There are people with like if the English name was Mary, to change it to Miriam. His thing is, he recommends take a brand new name, start fresh. If your name was, as I said, Jesus, don't just go with Yehoshua. Go with Eliezer. And some people do that, and some people feel very attached to their name that they've gone by for 30 years, and they feel like it's not my name's fault that I was born not, and they like to keep the name, whatever works. Siva was not Jewish. And when David says, is your name, Atat Siva, are you Siva? One of the commentators says, what he was asking is, are you still not Jewish? Are you still Siva, the non-Jewish servant, the Eved Kanani of King Saul, or is that no longer your name? Are you Siva, or do you have a different name like Moshe, Chaim? Have you converted to Judaism? And the response is, Ani Avdecha, I am your servant, which that commentator understands to be Siva saying, I'm still not Jewish. I'm still a Evet Kanani associated with the House of Saul. Saul has died, but I'm still in charge of the gardens. I'm still in charge of the, what is it called, topiary gardening. That's when they have those trees that the gardeners shape like Mickey Mouse and like different forms and shapes of the trees, topiary gardening, the bushes. I'm still in charge. So I'm still not Jewish, but I'm still a servant. Continues. The discussion continues. Okay. Vayomer HaMelech, ha'episode Ish Boshet Shaul, be'aseh mo chesed elokim. So he asks Siva, is there anybody else left in the House of Saul? So that I can do kindness, God's kindness, which is the best kindness. Like there's low-level kindness, and there's chesed elokim, and a special level of righteousness. Vayomer Siva HaMelech, and Siva responds to the king, oh, Ben, Linon Yonatan Nechei Haraglayim. Actually, there is, within the greater House of Saul, on the Jonathan branch, there is a descendant, a son of Jonathan, Saul's grandson, who is lame, basically crippled for life in his legs. And you all know that story from previous classes, so I won't repeat it here. Vayomer lo HaMelech efohu, and David says, okay, where is he? Vayomer Tziva HaMelech hinehu bet machir ben Amiel below davar. Tziva says, he's hiding from you, basically, at the house of a guy named Machir, son of Amiel. Remember, in the old days, people didn't have a last name. They didn't have a name like Dov Fischer or Benjamin Netanyahu. Everybody was known as so-and-so, the son of so-and-so. The whole idea of last names came out of the Middle Ages, the non-Jewish world, I believe primarily in Eastern Europe. For various reasons, foreign governments required everyone in their lands to assume a last name. Everybody had to pick a last name, and it had to be approved by and large by the king or the emperor. And usually, what name are they going to pick? No one else had names. It's not like you could say, well, let's see, I'm going to take George Washington. I'll take Washington, or I'll take Lincoln, or I'll take Begin, or Shamir, or I'll take, last name, I'll take Rabbeinu, like Moshe Rabbeinu. I'll take Avinu, like Avram. There were no last names. So most people took a last name either that described themselves physically. Taller people took names like high or tall, and shorter people took names like short. Kurtz, that's Kurtz. You met a Jew named Kurtz? The original Kurtz was not tall. Or they would take names of the job they had. Did they make windows and glass? Glazer. That's how Jews got some of these names. Was he a shoemaker? I believe that's Schneider. Or is that, one's a tailor and one is a shoemaker. And that's how they would take last names. Literally would tell you what they did for a living. Or they would take last names, if they were rich enough and famous and important, they would claim a last name of gold or silver. And that's how you ended up with all these Goldsteins and Goldbergs, Silverstein, Silver, Diamond, all Jewish names. That's how they got them. Some took color names, for whatever reason, green. They took blue. I was going to say no one took blue. That's Blau. You have met a Jew named Blau, B-L-A-U. That's German for blue, or Blaustein. And that's where last names came from. But if you wanted to tell King David where if Siva wanted to tell him where this crippled boy is hiding, you wouldn't say he's with Machir Schwartz. It's another thing. Jews take name Schwartz for black, or blacksmith, or dark-skinned. And if they were light-skinned, Weiss meant white. That's where last names came from. And people paid for the names. And if the king or emperor said, you're not worthy of that name, or if you want to name Gold, or Goldstein or Goldberg, in my country, you'll have to pay an extra fee to the king. And you'll say, what kind of person would pay extra money for a last name? Well, you're not in California, but if you were, you ought to look at license plates. What people won't pay to get the license plate they want on their car. And so Machir, that's where you can find the remaining son who went alive from Jonathan. The discussion continues. And his name is Mephivoshet. All right. So he's at Beit Machir ben Amiel. David, and David brings him Mephivoshet, ben Yonatan, the son of Jonathan, ben Shaul, the son of King Saul. Normally he would be known only as Mephivoshet ben Yonatan. But when your grandfather is the first king of Israel, you sometimes go by so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, the son of Abraham Lincoln, or George Washington, or Moshe Rabbeinu. He came to David, and as was done in those days and in many courts of the Middle Ages, he fell on his face and prostrated himself. And the commentators suggest that he was shaking and tremoring in fear because he still did not know what David's intentions were. Remind you, all of us know what David's intentions were. We began class with Shlomo Carlebach singing about the greatest king of in Jewish history, the progenitor of the Messiah. So we know how David worked out. But he doesn't know yet because he's in the story. And so he is terrified. Maybe he's going to be executed. Maybe David's purpose is trying to round up. That happens in a lot of autocratic countries when there's a coup and a new dictator rises, whether it's a military coup and it's a general or whatever it is. And they immediately round up. When the communists took over the Soviet Union, made it a Soviet Union, they immediately lined up everybody in any way, shape, or form related to Tsar Nicholas, his wife, his kids, his everything, and they executed all of them so that there'd be no one left from that line. And that's relatively common. They get everybody because otherwise there might be someone who survives and spends the rest of his life trying to organize to take back his rightful chair, throne, or whatever. So Mephivoshet is terrified. Vayomer David, Mephivoshet, and David says, "Come on, Mephivoshet." Vayomer Hinei Avdecha. He says, like Tziva, "Behold, I am your servant. Your servant is here." But the commentator says, in the case of Tziva, he's actually saying, "I am a servant," in Evet Kanani, not Jewish, where the implication of Mephivoshet is, I'm a servant, I'm your humble servant to the king, whom I recognize. If there was any question in the time of my father, not my father, my uncle, Yonatan's one living brother, Mephivoshet's uncle, Ish Boshet, who had been the initial successor to Saul, who was supported by the commander-in-chief of his army, Avner ben Ner, Abner. And there was that period between when David was king only in Judea and in Hebron, while Ish Boshet was king over the other 11 tribes. And we learned how that resolved itself very tragically for Ish Boshet, who was assassinated by his own people, and tragically for Avner, who was killed by Yoav, the commander-in-chief of David's army. But Mephivoshet doesn't know what's about to happen, but he's basically the only living remainder of the House of Saul. Vayomer lo David al tira, ki aso ese imcha chesed. And David says, don't tremble, don't fear. I'm going to do kindness to you because of your father, Jonathan. Why doesn't David just say, I'm going to do kindness to you, period? Because he wants to reassure Mephivoshet, no, this is the real thing. Not that he's succouring me into putting down my guard and he has bad long-term intentions. He's reassuring me that this is a true warmth and kindness rooted in his relationship with Yonatan. Not only David says, am I going to be kind to you? I'm going to restore to you all the estates of the House of Saul. And those are a lot of estates. He was king of Israel. So he had a lot of stuff. We're not talking about a nice backyard, even with a swimming pool. We're talking about unbelievable estates that you would expect. Like, think of the King of England or Queen of England. We've lived through both. Think of the stuff they have and what their royal jewels are compared to someone who just has some money in the bank. I'm going to give you everything, all your estates, all your fields, everything that had belonged to your father. And you permanently, tamid, for the rest of your life, will eat bread, lechem, at my shulchan, at my table. What does it mean to eat at a king's table? We're going to find out soon. Vayishtachu, and unbelievable. So Mephivoshet just is blown away. He bows down again. Does not say he fell on his face this time. First time it said, Vayipol al panav, flung himself on his face, Vayishtachu, and prostrated. This time, okay, that's different. He prostrates. Vayomer me avdecha, and he says in humility, what am I? What am I? I'm your servant. What am I to deserve this? Kifanita elakel v'met asher kamoni, that you've turned to me like I'm a dead dog in your presence. And we previously, so I won't do it now, have seen that several times King David, in his dealings with King Saul, when he was on the run fleeing from Saul, who was pursuing him to kill him, and there would be respites when David would have the ability to King Saul to kill Saul and would not kill him. In the time, for example, when he cut off a piece of King Saul's robe while he was unaware, and later David showed, I was that close to killing you, and I did not take advantage of it. Another time when King Saul and his army were asleep, encamped at the nearby hill, and then David and his men, two of his men went, and they took his canteen and his sword, and then they called back from the other side, letting him know they had taken his canteen and sword while he was sleeping. They could have killed him. And each time Saul would say, I've been wrong. I should never have, I don't know why I do this. I mean, you're my son. You're a wonderful guy. And David would say, what do you want from me? I'm only a dead dog. Well, I am as a dead dog. So I guess it was an expression in those days, because not only was it David's expression, but here Mephivoshet is using that same expression to David. And it's not like David would use it, and then there would be books and things on YouTube where people would see that like nobody knew it. No way did Mephivoshet know that expression. I don't know. Maybe did he ever hear his grandfather once say at a meal that, David, I shouldn't have gone after him, and he said to me, I don't know. But I catch that expression. He's speaking in humility and saying, who am I to deserve this? King David calls Tsiva back. Now Tsiva is referred to as Saul's major domo, basically. His steward. I like major domo. He's in charge of everything, the stewardship of Saul's estates. So he calls him back, and he says to him, Kol asher hayal Shaul ulachol beito natati leven adonecha. Everything that belonged to King Saul, your master, and to his entire house, his entire household, meaning his family, and natati leven adonecha, I have given to the son of your master, your Lord. Adon is an interesting word. It means Lord. When you refer to God, like we say a bracha, Baruch atah, and I'm allowed to say the name, even though it's not a real, because I'm teaching Torah. Like when someone says Baruch atah Adonai Elokeinu, so the Adon, that means Lord. Noi, my Lord. Elokeinu, our God. Blessed art thou, my Lord, our God. Blessed art thou, my Lord, our God, King of the universe, Melech Olam, Asher Kishon, etc. So the word Adoni means Lord. And when you speak in the street, like the way they talk in certain places, yes, my lord. No, my lord. They call you Adoni. I wasn't accustomed to that when I first went to Israel in 1972. And I'd be stopped on the street, being asked for money by, let's say, a beggar in Jerusalem. And I don't mean to use a pejorative term by saying beggar. And someone seeking alms, and they would stop you and say, they don't know my name. And they would stop me, Adoni, Adoni. And I had never heard that before, which means my Lord, my Lord. But I came to learn that's how people refer to each other. And after all, in England, they use the word Lord, like in the House of Lords. And when we write the word, when we write God, out of deference to the holy name of God, we write G-D. When we write Lord, those who write G-D, Orthodox Jews that take the name so holy, even in English, in the same way when we write Lord, we write L-RD. And again, I mean, it sounds silly now, but the first time you do anything, it's the first time you do anything. And the first time I ever wrote, like, there was the king of England, chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, Lord Sachs, and before him was Lord Jacobowitz, we called him in America, and then when he went to England, it became Jacobovich or something like that, and it was Lord Jacobovich, Rabbi Lord, I'm not sure which goes first, and he's also got title Doctor, so it's like I know there's Rabbi Doctor, there's the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. But when you start having Lord, Rabbi, Doctor, and Esquire, so I don't remember what goes in what order. But I remember the first time I actually wrote something, not a letter to him, but I was writing an article and I was referring to Lord, and I instinctively wrote L-RD. I had never written L-O-R-D. And then I had to do a 1 second analysis in my mind. It's not referring to God. It's referring to Lord Jacobovich. And so Adoni is a term that's used a lot in the Bible, referring to a respectful term, and that's how they talk. I was just mentioning to someone the other day, someone had been consulting me. Yeah, it's worth mentioning also. We learn all kinds of things in these classes. So one of the things that rabbis do that don't get a lot of attention, but we do it, is we consult on the writing on tombstones. When God forbid, someone has a loss, and they start preparing the tombstone wording, very often a rabbi gets consulted. Make sure the spelling is right. Often they don't quite know what the name is because the parents didn't really know what their name was. They knew their English name, but so they knew their name. They pronounce it in a garbled kind of Yiddish way that's not really a name. And then the rabbi would be called and something like, my father, my father's name in English, and I'm not referring to anybody. Names have been changed to protect the innocent. Guy would say, like, my father's name was Isaac, and he says, and his Hebrew name was Itri. Is that a name? Is his name Itri? And never really cared about it, but now they're putting it on. What are we going to put down? Like Itchy and it's like a joint with the wife, scratchy. And so you get called, like, what's the name? And you have to know that Itchy is really Itcha, and Itcha is really Yitzchak in Yiddish. And you have to figure out, did he go really by Yitzchak? Did he go by Itcha? And you got to do that a lot of times to come up with the exact name. And that's like a big thing. And so I mention it because here what we see as we go back to the text, we're getting these names together. And in that, I know, I'm sorry. So in that context, 1 more second. So I just did one recently And he was wondering, on many tombstones, it'll say the guy's name, and right before it, there's a resh with like an apostrophe, and that's short for Reb. Or let's say the name of the guy is Yitzchak ben Avraham, our second patriarch. So it would say Yitzchak Beit, like quotation marks, like two of them, Resh. Yitzchak Bet Resh Avraham. And then the person asks, what's that? And I'll say it's Yitzchak Bereb or Ben Reb Avraham. And the Resh at the beginning is Reb Yitzchak Bereb Avraham. And then the person comes back and says, my dad was not a rabbi. Reb, out here, a lot of people are Chabad people. So they've heard of the Rebbe. So they hear the word Reb, and they think that means that the guy was a rabbi. Obviously, in Mississippi, they hear the word Reb, and they think of the Civil War. So I explained, no, Reb was just a formal honorific, even to this day. Like if you watch Fiddler on the Roof, so Tevye the milkman, he's not terribly important in the general societal structure, but throughout the movie or play, they refer to Reb Tevye. How are you, Reb Tevye? How are you, Reb Lazer? And that's how people refer to each other. So in the Middle Ages, in the shtetl, it was Reb. In Hebrew language, in the Yiddish-speaking world, in the Hebrew-speaking world, it's Adoni. So getting back to this. So David tells Siva, I've just given to Mephivoshet all the estates of your master Shaul, Notati leven Adonecha, I've given to the son of your Lord, your master. V'avadet to Adama, and you shall work, Oved, you shall work lo on his behalf for him, et ha'adama, literally the earth. But you'll work the land for him, all the estates. Ata uvanecha va'avadecha, you and your son. If it were plural, it would be vanayich. So it implies one son. Va'avadecha, and your servants. Veheveta, and you furthermore will bring him, Bahaya leven adonecha lechem va'achalu. You will bring lahavi, you will bring the bread that you will derive from the estates that you work, bahaya leven adonecha lechem, so that he will have bread. It's quite a thing if you think about it. You work the fields. What are you growing? Not bread. You're growing stalks of grain. Now, implicitly, you're going to have what David is saying when he says you're going to bring them bread. He's also saying in one word, you're going to work the fields, and you're going to cut the stalks, and you're going to get out the chaff, minnow out the chaff, whatever it is, and you're going to grind it into flour, and you're going to mix it with water, and you're going to knead it with the K-N-E-A-D. You're going to knead the dough, and you're going to shape it into bread, and you're going to bake the bread, and you're going to slice the bread. In other words, I'm putting you to work full-time now, and that's just a bakery. I'm going to have you working all those fields, and you're going to be you're going to be slaughtering animals, and you're going to be preparing meals, and you're going to be busy. You're going to have a full-time job, you and your entire household. You'll work the field on behalf of, that'll be you, your son, your subservants who work for you, Tziva, and you'll bring to the son of your master bread that he can eat. Mephivoshet ben Adonecha, yochal tamid lechem al shulchani. And this is interesting, and the commentators pick up on that. And Mephivoshet, the son of your master, will permanently eat bread at my table. Wait, if he's going to be eating bread from Siva, if Siva is going to be making him bread every day at home, at the palace, what does that mean? He's going to be eating every day bread with the king, at the king's table. We'll look in a moment. And Siva had multiplied I don't know whether he ever took math, but he multiplied 15 sons and 20 servants. So he's got 35 people working for him, which is what he needed for those estates, the royal estates. If you've ever watched Downton Abbey or Upstairs, Downstairs, you know, they have a lot of people working just for one or two people, just for the Lord and Lady of the house, to have like half a city working for them. To have the people downstairs, and they have the groundskeepers, and the chauffeur, and to have a lot of people work for them. And Siva says to the king, according to all, as all, according to all, Asher Yitzaveh Adoni, to all that my Lord, you, my Lord, have commanded me, the king, you, my Lord, the king, have commanded me, at Avdo. So he's talking third person, which you've learned a long time ago with me, is the way we refer when we talk to a great Torah scholar. We refer to the Torah scholar in third person as we're talking to him, not second person. So in the same way, Siva says to King David, according to all that my Lord the king has commanded his servant, Ken ya'aseh avdecha, thus shall your servant do. Mephivoshet ochel al shulchani. And David then adds again, as a reminder, because Mephivoshet is crippled. And in those days, they don't have Uber, right? They don't have Lyft, where you can just dial up a phone number to drive you to the palace. Mephivoshet will be dependent on Siva to remember to bring him daily to the palace or whenever. So David reminds him a third time, Mephivoshet ochel al shulchani. Mephivoshet will eat at my table, ke'achad mibnei hamelach, like one of the sons of the king. Mephivoshet ben katan ushmo Micha. And Mephivoshet has also extended the family line of Saul, Jonathan, Mephivoshet, and his son, Micha. Did we encounter Micha earlier, where he's hiding? Yes and no. We found out that he's hiding with someone, Machir. I was going to say anyway, that was Machir, the son of Amiel. And his son is Micha, the son of Mephivoshet. V'chol mashav bet siva avadim Mephivoshet, finishing the chapter, Mephivoshet Yoshev Yerushalayim, and Mephivoshet resided in Jerusalem. Remember, the House of Saul was on the other side of the line in the territory of Binyamin. Remember that boundary that separated Binyamin from Yehuda, the tribe of Benjamin from the tribe of Judea? And you remember Jerusalem was kind of like straddling the border. Mephivoshet continued living in Jerusalem because he had to have proximity to the king, since he was the king daily. And he was crippled in both legs. Now, I want to take out a moment before we get into the commentators. I want to take out a moment to get into, and it's going to seem a little silly, but what does it mean to eat at the king's table? I had 3 weeks of Sukkot. Didn't really have that much spare time. I thought I was going to have a 2-week vacation. The thing is, for those of you who are Orthodox Jews, you get to take off on Shabbat and Yom Tov. That's when we work the hardest. And I started my vacation building a sukkah, and then having guests every day in the sukkah. Denise and I were more busy on Sukkot than we are any other week. So I didn't have a lot of time. I'm not complaining. I love it. I'm now at a point that I can actually claim I'm old enough to retire. I'm just not old enough. On Saturday, I was 71, Shabbat. Denise made me a chiffon cake, chocolate. I hope I got the right cake. I hope I didn't get the cake wrong, or I'm in real trouble. Anyway, So I was taking a little bit of time during the vacation. I was curious, what does it mean to eat at the king's table? You'll say to me, come on, there's a table. Okay, it's like a dais. I've seen some of those movies from medieval England with Peter O'Toole playing King Henry, like Lion in Winter or Beckett, or the other one, The Man for All Seasons. And it's like they have a dais like at a bar mitzvah, and everybody eats. The only thing is, in those days, they eat with their hands without a fork and a knife. But I really was wondering, because there's like a big thing. I'm going to take out about 10 minutes. I think it's worth it because there's been 4 references in one chapter that he's going to eat at the king's table. What does it mean to eat at a king's table? Here we go. It's really I found it so interesting. I think it gave me a better picture of what that really entails. So if it seems like a little bit of a segue, it's really not.
Knives like daggers, and the proper way to deal with lamb leftovers. If you're going to eat like a royal, then you've got to know the rules. If you ever find yourself at a formal banquet, you might want to savor each bite, but you should try to eat at the same speed as the monarch. A royal dinner comes in many courses, which are set and cleared according to when the monarch finishes eating. Perhaps no one knows this better than Darren McGrady, who worked as the Queen's personal chef for 11 years. He told HuffPost, "The palace steward would stand behind the Queen. As soon as she put down her knife and fork from the first course, he would hit the button for the lights to signal the footman to come in. The course was over and they'd start clearing. Even if you hadn't finished, they'd be clearing the table. So, if you eat slowly, your meal could be taken before you finish. If you eat too fast, you'll be waiting a long time before the next course." Beyond getting your plate taken away, following the monarch's cues is considered good manners, according to etiquette expert William Hansen. Speaking to Marie Claire, Hansen said, "No one should begin until the Queen begins eating. Similarly, when the Queen's cutlery goes into the finished position, everyone else should follow suit, regardless of whether there is food left on their own plates." While guests may be excited to talk to everyone at the table at a royal banquet, it's only appropriate to talk to people sitting directly next to you. William Hansen explained this to Marie Claire, saying, "With formal dining, conversation flows to each person's left and right, rarely ever across the dining table. Once the conversation begins in one direction, it continues that way until about halfway through the meal. And if you don't follow these rules, there can be social consequences. Just ask Formula One world champion Lewis Hamilton. One of his first royal experiences was in 2009, when he was invited to lunch with Queen Elizabeth. Hamilton was one of 8 guests and was seated to the Queen's left. He was understandably excited and began chatting with her right away, but she quickly corrected him.
She's like, "No, you speak that way first, and I'll speak this way, and I'll come back to you."
As promised, partway through the meal, the conversation switched sides, and he was able to have a good chat with the Queen.
Tea? Oh, yes, please.
While the idea of afternoon tea may sound charming, there are some rules of conduct that royals have to follow. Even making the tea has a precise order of operations. Grant Harold, a former butler to King Charles, shared the secret to making a cup of tea worthy of the royal family with insider. Most of his instructions were straightforward, such as adding the milk after the tea. However, one surprising point he made was to stir the tea back and forth rather than in a circular motion. Harold said, "If we stir in a circular motion, we can create a storm in a teacup and see the tea coming over the sides, which we should never allow. Another problem with stirring in a circle is noise-related. If the spoon touches the sides, it makes a clinging sound, and we don't want that at the afternoon tea table." After the tea is prepared, there are also expectations for how to drink it. William Hansen told Marie Claire the proper way to hold a teacup is by pinching the thumb and index finger in the handle. and said, "It is not, contrary to popular belief, sophisticated to stick the little finger out when drinking tea or coffee." He added that royals should also always drink from the same side of their cup, especially if wearing lipstick, so they don't end up with stains all over the rim. There are some recipes that are avoided for royal meals, and that includes any dishes containing too much garlic. The current Queen Consort, Camilla Parker Bowles, confirmed this restriction on MasterChef Australia.
So garlic is a no-no?
Garlic is a no.
Because you're talking, chatting, expected to be...
Exactly, it's always, so you just have to lay off the garlic.
Royal chef Darren McGrady confirmed this garlic ban and added that onions are also a no-go. He told The Express, "We can never serve anything with garlic or too much onions. The Queen would never have garlic on the menu." Another former royal chef, John Higgins, told the National Post, "The Queen is a wonderful lady. The royal family are wonderful people, but they're missing out on garlic because at Buckingham Palace, you don't cook with garlic." You may have heard that the proper way to hold a fork and knife is with the knife in the right hand and the fork in the left. Etiquette expert William Hanson told Marie Claire that this concept dates back to when men would carry their swords and daggers in their right hand. Fortunately for left-handed people everywhere, Hanson has proclaimed this outdated rule a load of rubbish, and now the utensils can go in either hand, even in formal dining. But that doesn't mean you can handle your fork and knife however you like. Hanson was quick to outline some utensil rules that are still crucial to follow. The index finger goes down the fork, stopping before the bridge. For knives, the index finger also extends down the knife, stopping where the blade and handle meet. Royals and anyone dining with them should also be mindful that their fork doesn't scrape against the plate. However, we're all human, and Hanson said this wasn't a big deal if it happened a couple of times accidentally, although he added, "But to continue to do so is especially unfortunate." The royals also have rules for what they do after finishing a meal. Rather than just setting their fork to the side, they'll place their cutlery together on their plate. There's a specific positioning for this, which Hanson explained. If you imagine the plate as a clock face and the cutlery as the hands of the clock, when finished eating in Britain, the cutlery is positioned at 6:30, with the tines of the fork facing upwards. This may seem like an arbitrary rule and just another thing to remember, but it's actually to help the staff. By placing their utensils together on the plate, the royals and dinner guests are signalling that they're done eating, so the staff knows they're safe to clear the plate without asking. Placing the silverware on the plate rather than on the table also ensures that they don't get any food on the tablecloth. The royals are well known for their impeccable style, and when it comes to meal times, they dress to impress. Darren McGrady told HuffPost that a good portion of the royals' day is dedicated to dressing properly for every occasion. Even for breakfast, when many of us would still be in pyjamas, the royals are already dressed for the day. According to McGrady, they would dress so many different times. First thing in the morning, coming down for breakfast, they'd be dressed. Then they'd go off hunting or shooting and come back. Then they'd shower and change to go into afternoon tea, and then they'd change again for dinner. William Hanson expanded on the specifics of royal fashion, telling Marie Claire, "They never follow fashion fads, but instead dress in a more timeless, elegant way. When it comes to state meals, even more formality is expected." According to Hanson, ladies' shoulders should be covered, wearing long, floor-length dresses with hair worn up. Men are in black wool tailcoats, white winged collared shirts, and white bow ties. Although the royal family has access to some of the best chefs and could enjoy lavish meals every day, they're not as extravagant as you might think. At least, according to chef Carolyn Robb, who worked at Kensington Palace from 1989 to 2000. Robb spoke to Racked about her experiences as a royal chef and said that they didn't often prepare expensive dishes. Ingredients could be harvested from their garden and they cooked freshly hunted game. It was quite economical, the way the kitchen was run. We would do more extravagant things if we were entertaining. In the same economic spirit, they were instructed not to throw any food away. Speaking about King Charles, Rob said, if there were leftovers, they'd be used one way or another. If not for him, then rehashed and used for a meal the following day. Rob explained that leftover roast lamb could easily go into a shepherd's pie, and to avoid having too many leftovers, the kitchen staff was careful to keep portion sizes fairly small. Rob said Charles didn't like huge amounts of food on the plate.
This is delicious, Mrs. Raymond. Absolutely delicious.
They're just leftovers.
The royals have many considerations about when and if they can accept gifts from well-wishers. As outlined by their official gifts policy, this is primarily because they shouldn't accept any gifts that can be seen as indebting them to anyone. For this reason, all potential gift givers are discouraged from giving the royals any extravagant presents worth a great deal of money. Royals are also usually directed to refuse gifts from businesses for the same reason. Because food is typically a more affordable gift, royals can usually accept it. According to the guide, consumable items such as flowers and food are acceptable offerings, provided they come from individuals, not organizations, and as long as they come in reasonable amounts. So, if you're planning to gift the royal family some cupcakes, don't go overboard baking enough for the whole palace. Along with staying impeccably dressed, one accessory you could always count on Queen Elizabeth to carry was her handbag. It turns out this was more than a style choice. She used it to send signals to her staff. Royal historian Hugo Vickers explained to people that when the Queen wanted to finish a conversation, she would move her purse in a specific way. He said, "It would be very worrying if you were talking to the Queen and saw the handbag move from one hand to the other." But not everyone would know the signal, so it was an easy way for her to leave a conversation graciously. Once a member of her staff saw her switch her handbag, they'd come over and make the necessary excuses for her to leave. The Queen would use her purse similarly to signal the end of meals. If she placed her bag on the table at dinner, it was her way of letting everyone know she wanted the evening to wrap up in 5 minutes. It was a subtle way for her to avoid uncomfortable situations. Storm.
Now I'm going to suggest that King David's table was a little less formal than that. But as I was watching that, in my mind, I was just over and over. I was just playing in my head Lee Greenwood's song, "And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I can be a mess. At least where at least I can make tea." Okay, there we go. So anyway, let's learn a little bit more. I don't want to just close on that, but I think that's important to see, because I think it's important to have an understanding that when a king says that Mephivoshet will eat at my table, he's not merely discussing, I'll feed him. What he's really saying is he will be part of a remarkably honorable status that is accorded to very few people, and that will give him the right to be not only in special circles, but in circles in which other people would not even fit. And he'll have that for the rest of his life. And as someone who is lame, crippled, I don't know if that's an improper word, or I'll stick with lame. As someone who is lame and might be thought of as lower class, a Baal Mum, a person with a physical flaw, it should alleviate any feeling on his part of not being presentable in mixed society. Because what is more presentable and honorable than someone who is invited daily to eat at the king's table, in light of what we just saw now about being at the king's table? Let's quickly look at some commentaries, take about 10 minutes and see how far we go. Radak. So we just learned all of chapter 9. Radak. On Hachi Eshod, when David asks, is there anybody else from the house of Saul? So he says, Zehanyan, Zachar Zehanyan, David raised this matter now. He just won all of his wars. and he now is at peace, at rest. V'sider hapetidim v'hamemuneim sham sam elibo. So, and he's arranged all the officers and appointees that will run his government. So now sam elibo, he put in his heart, he attended to shivuat Yonatan, his oath to Jonathan, she'im hayabis aro adam ro'oi v'hagun, that if someone worthy would descend from Jonathan, I mean, couldn't quite do it if Jonathan, God forbid, would have a real boor of a son, but if he had any kind of decent son, hayam emane oto, that David promised he would appoint him and make him important, as Kamosha Marlo Yonatan Vani Yelechal Mishneh, as Jonathan during his lifetime in their vow and their covenant between each other, Jonathan said, you'll be king and I'll always be at your side, like your Lefichach Sha'alim Notar Leveit Shaul. Therefore, David asked, is anyone left? She'aseh mochesed ba'avur Yonatan, so that he could do kindness on behalf of Jonathan. Malbim talking to Tsiva. I discussed this, here we are in the text. It was the Malbim who pointed this out. Leveit Shaul Evet, Zakan Beito. Tsiva was the elder of the house, literally the major domo. Domo is like from domestic, okay, house, and major Zaken, the elder of the house, the major domo. So, Korulo Lidrosh Meito Ayehema. So David called for the major domo of the entire household to ask, where are they? Umashur HaMelech Atatza Umasha Sha'al HaMelech Atatziva. And as far as understanding what David meant when he said, are you Tziva? Gam Kain Sha'aloto Imhu Adayan Tziva. In other words, he was asking, are you still going by the name Tziva? Ratzalomar, wanting to say, Eved Bilti Meshuchrar, are you still an unliberated servant? O Nishtach Remi Bet Shaul, or have you been formally liberated, emancipated from the House of Saul? Ki HaMeshuchrarim Shinu et Shmam, because servants who were emancipated and freed from their servitude would change their names. L'shem Yahadut, to a Jewish name. You know, Avram, Yitzchak, Moshe, Aaron, Kederach HaGerim, as is done when converts change their names and take on a Jewish name. V'heshiv Avdecha, Shu Adayin Eved. And the response from Siva was, I am your servant, gently implying I'm still a servant. And then David asks, is there anybody still left in the house of Saul? Malbim continuing, Ha'efes Odish, Achar Shelo Ba'u Lekabel Chesed. David's reason for asking was, he was surprised as the king that nobody was coming and asking for a job. That's what happens in a few weeks when a new president steps in January. There'll be a whole line of people saying, I worked on your campaign and I'd like some spoils. I'd like an appointment. I'd like to be the head of this commission, or I'd like to be a member of this commission, or I'd like to be on the federal commission in my city, in my county. And here he is, the king. And it was common in every society when a new head of government takes over, people line up to ask for a job. And he's saying, when nobody came to ask, he was wondering, is there nobody from the house of Saul? They would be first in line. He's asking, is there nobody, Ephes, zero, is there nobody, Ish person? Is there nobody, no man? In other words, is there no one from the house of Saul worthy, eligible to be appointed? And he added, because if there is, I'll do the grace of God. And that refers, he's offering it to anyone from the greater house of Saul, not only Jonathan. Kilo Amar Ba'avur Yonatan. He didn't say exclusively, I'll do it on behalf of Jonathan, but Beit Shaul. V'heshivlo shenimtza ben Yonatan. And Siva responded, there is a son of Jonathan. However, he is crippled, unable to, his legs can't move, and therefore it would seem he's not appropriate to be appointed to a position of responsibility or of honor, because that's the predisposition. All the more so in those days. Now there's a greater societal sensitivity to handicap and disability. There's in the United States, the ADA that protects certain rights of the disabled. You all see when you go parking places, there are handicap spots. Many of you remember a time that did not exist. So in that time, people who were in any way physically disadvantaged, whether it's Jews or anyone, you just weren't thought highly of. And Siva is saying, yes, there is a representative, there is a survivor in the house, but I don't know if you're going to want to give him anything because he's not keraglayim. And David says, I sure do. I want him here, and I want him at my table the rest of his life. By Mephivoshet ben Yonatan bet Shaul, the Chomat Anach comments on Mephivoshet coming. And the idea that I told you that when he bowed down and prostrated, it struck David that he's shaking. Perusha hayalo pachad. Mephivoshet was filled with fear. Mishum shahaya neched Shaul, because he was the grandson of Saul. Shaloyina came imenu. He was afraid that David would take revenge against him because of Saul pursuing David all those years trying to kill him. Umitzad acher hayalo tikva. On the other hand, he was thinking, maybe there's reason to hope. Shehu ben Yonatan, because he's the son of Jonathan. On the one hand, if David is negatively disposed, he may want to do terrible things to me as the grandson of the man who tried to kill me, him, frequently, or he may be disposed to do wonderful things because I'm the son of his beloved friend. Shehu ben Yonatan, ahuvo uven brito. Jonathan was his beloved and the one with whom he had a covenant. And not only did he bow down, but he like fell and prostrated and he put his face on the ground. In other words, Yorah v'ro'ed, he was in terror and he was trembling. Umitnuato umarit panav, and from looking at him tremble and move that way and seeing the face of fear, he kir David, he libo yareu mitpached. David could perceive how frightened Mephivoshet was. Lochein omarlo, explicitly, al tira. That's the reason that David said to him, don't be afraid. When he saw how he bowed down, he emphasized, don't be afraid. Al tira. So, tiaso imcha chesed bikiflayim. Kefel is double. So he said it not just aso, but aso esa. He could have said ki esa imcha chesed, because I will do imcha with you chesed, kindness, because I will do kindness with you, to you. And David said aso esa imcha chesed. He doubled it. I will surely indeed do kindness to you. B'zeh amar aso esa. That's why he said it twice. How did he say it again? Let's say in the text. What did David said? Al tira. Don't be afraid, because he saw the fearful trembling. Ki aso esa. Because I surely will do. Just really wrapping it up now. Now Mephivoshet, we'll do this next time. I'll do that Gemara next time, a little quicker. This allows us to finish the other three real quick. And then David tells Siva, so I have given the son of your master, namely Mephivoshet, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul. I've given him everything. Hamelech Rashai Lavir Nachala. So if you would ask the question, by what right does David just sit there and with a snap of a finger take someone else's estates, in this case Saul's estates, and transfer them to someone else? Well, the king of Israel, by Jewish law, has the authority, power, and right to transfer to seize and take anyone's possessions. We've learned that many, many times on the Thursday night class. We even spent time in one case learning the horrible story of how at the time of Queen Jezebel, how she was able to influence her husband to seize the estates, a vineyard that the husband wanted, the king wanted, and didn't know how to get. And she said, well, just take it. And she masterminded having that true owner of the vineyard executed, putting forth a false lie that he had blasphemed against God. Then she lined up 2 false witnesses to swear to it. And under Jewish law, the king, b'mishpat ha'melucha, the king has the authority to take the fields of anyone. And it was here that we see that in 1 Samuel. We're in 2 Samuel. In Shmuel, 1 Samuel chapter 8, Shmuel the prophet warned the Jewish people when they started demanding of him, name and anoint a king for us. We want to have a king like all of the nations. Samuel was trying to warn them, are you sure? Do you know what you're getting yourselves into? He's going to take your sons and daughters. He's going to take them from you. He's going to make them his servants and his maids. He's going to take your lands from you. He's going to be'et sidotechem, be'et karmechem, v'zeitechem atovim mikach. And he's going to take your fields and your vineyards and your olive fields, groves, and he's going to take them all, and he's not even for himself. He's just going to give them to his servants. You know what you want to do? So we've learned that the king had that authority when he told Siva, finally, last commentator for tonight. So he then tells Mephivoshet, you'll be at my table the rest of your life, and you'll eat bread at my table. Yochal tamid lechem al shulchani. Forevermore, you'll eat bread at my table. And yet, on the other hand, he just told Siva, that you, Siva, will be making bread for Mephivoshet for him to eat every day. So what's the deal? Is he going to eat bread there or here? The avaratolo perish. Ki ochle shulchan hamelech lo samchu al zeh kol mechyatam. The reality is that those who ate at the king's table did not rely on that invitation for full meals. Ki ikarsu datam hayabavetam. Because actually, when you were invited to the king's table, the substance, the essence of your meal, you ate at home. Sham ya'asu lechem rav livnei veitam umiyod ehem. And that's where you would eat most of your bread, most of your meal. And then, afterwards, you would go to the king, like for dessert or something. After they've been satisfied at home, you then would go to the king's table for the honor and glory of sitting with that royalty, and you would have maybe a little, like a dessert. And in other words, they'll all eat at the house, everyone, and also Tziva and his family and those who work for him. And then that'll be mitzad malato, yochal al shulchani lechavod, and you'll eat at my table for the honor of it. And that's tonight's class. Thank you so much for coming and joining with us. Class has ended. Janet has a question. I'm so grateful that everybody came back. As I mentioned on Sunday, you're always afraid when you take off a few weeks, will people remember you and come back when you come back? And this is like a full house. I don't play poker, but this is a full house. So I want to thank everybody for being here, and have a wonderful week. Next Tuesday, November 5th, we will not meet. That's election day. Everybody, a lot of people are going to be missing it. People are going to have their heads all over the place. And so we're not going to meet next Tuesday. I'll put out a reminder. And we are going to meet Thursday of this week. We are going to meet the following Thursday. We are going to meet Sunday, just not Election Day. Do remember to vote. And Janet, what's your question?
So just a reminder that Mephivoshet sitting at David's table is full circle, because remember, before he was even son-in-law, David was commanded to come sit by Jonathan at Saul's table. Remember, there was a period when
Sure. David used to be at Saul's table, and then he avoided showing up at Saul's table because he perceived today, if I show up at Saul's table, he's going to kill me.
and Saul
good-
would notice and
good
say,
reference.
"Where was David?" You know, that was like a big deal if you didn't come.
That was a very big deal. Thank you very much, Janet. For those of you that have been with us through 1 Samuel, Shmuel Aleph, Janet reminds, it's really an interesting point with which I'll close now. The idea that it was such a big thing. On the one hand, the person invited, it's the ultimate honor to be invited to the king's table. And the flip side, you better not show up if the king invited you. You better be there no matter what, if the king invited you. And therefore, it was such an extraordinary moment when the king had invited David to be at his table, and David sat there every day, just as David now is doing for Mephivoshet. But that day he didn't come, and the next day. And Saul looked at Jonathan, because he knew Jonathan and David were really close, and he said to Jonathan, "What's going on?" And Jonathan conveyed that he had given David permission to leave town and go and visit with his family, his parents. Saul knew that David knew Saul was going to kill him. And Saul knew that Jonathan knew that Saul was going to kill David that day. So Saul knew that Jonathan knew that he was telling David to go visit your family to save his life in defiance of Jonathan's father. And the father got so angry that for a moment he threw a spear at him, I think, and tried to kill Jonathan. So it stood out that David did not show up, and it had been David's honor that he was able to be there every day. See you at our next class. Be well, be well. Wonderful to have everybody back. Bye.